The blood price. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to the air, a familiar companion in my life as an ER doctor. But today, it was a suffocating shroud. My ribs screamed with every shallow breath, a constant reminder of the drunk driver who'd veered into my lane just last week. Lying in this hospital bed recovering from a splenectomy, I expected quiet. Maybe a visit from a colleague, certainly not this. My phone buzzed, vibrating against the pristine white sheets. It was Julian, my older brother. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Julian never called unless he needed something, and something usually meant money. I hesitated, then answered. "Julian, what do you want?" My voice was raspy, still recovering from the intubation.
"Eleanor, my God, Elle, you answer like I'm interrupting your spa day."
He snarled, his voice thick with a forced joviality that grated on my nerves.
"Look, I heard about the accident. Rough break, sis. Really rough."
"Get to the point, Julian. I'm not in the mood for your fake concern." I shot back a surge of adrenaline, momentarily dulling the pain. My patience had worn thinner than old surgical gloves over the years where Julian was concerned. A beat of silence, then his tone shifted, hardening like concrete.
"Fine. Cut the theatrics. I need $8,500. Today."
I almost laughed, but the pain in my side flared.
"Are you out of your mind?"
$8,500, Julian. I just came out of surgery. I'm on medical leave. Where in God's name would I get that kind of money, and why do you even need it? It's urgent, Elle. My crypto investments went south, okay? And I owe some people a lot of cash by sundown. If I don't pay, things are going to get ugly. Like, really ugly. Dad said you'd help. He said you always help family. Dad said you'd help. The words echoed like a death knell in my ears. Always Dad pulling the family strings, always Julian the perpetual victim. A wave of ice-cold fury washed over me, sharper than any surgical blade. Dad said, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, seething with a rage so profound it felt foreign, yet terrifyingly familiar. Dad said, Julian, I'm lying in a hospital bed, barely able to breathe, and you and Dad think this is the time to extort me for your reckless gambling debts. It's not extortion, Elle. It's family. What kind of sister are you? Do you want to see me dead? Because that's what's going to happen if you don't cough up the cash. His voice rose desperate and laced with a threat that wasn't entirely veiled. My fingers tightened around the phone, my knuckles white. Dead. He always went for the jugular, didn't he? Always the drama, the guilt-tripping, the emotional blackmail. But this time, it was different. This time, I was broken physically and emotionally, and something inside me snapped. You know what, Julian? I said, my voice dangerously calm, each word a cold, calculated strike. For once in your pathetic life, you can face the consequences of your own actions. I'm not giving you a single cent. And if those people come looking for you, tell them Eleanor Vance said to send them my regards. Because this is the last time you ever try to bleed me dry. I ended the call, my hand trembling. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from pain, but from a burgeoning resolve. Julian, Dad, their endless demands, their emotional terrorism, it had to end. And lying here helpless and vulnerable, I realized that this moment, this excruciating demand, was the catalyst. The blood price they had always expected me to pay was finally too high. I would not be their ATM anymore. I would not be their scapegoat. I would fight back. Echoes of the past. The silence that followed the click of the hang-up was heavier than the Chicago winter pressing against the triple-paned hospital windows. My heart
was a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bruised ribs. I stared at the ceiling, the flickering fluorescent light overhead, mimicking the strobing memories I had spent years trying to suppress. Julian hadn't always been a monster, or maybe I had just been too young to recognize the teeth behind the smile. I remembered being 7 years old clutching a crumpled $10 bill I'd earned from pulling weeds in Mrs. Gable's garden. It was my ice cream and comic book fund. By dinner, it was gone. I found Julian in the backyard, his mouth stained red from a luxury box of chocolates he hadn't bought. "I just borrowed it, Elle," he'd said, his 12-year-old face already perfecting that look of wounded innocence. "Dad said we share in this house. Don't be selfish." And Dad, God, Arthur Vance, was the architect of my misery. A retired CPD sergeant who treated family loyalty like a religious cult. If Julian broke a window, I was the one who should have been watching him. If Julian stole, I was the one who was too lucky and needed to balance the scales. The hospital door creaked open. I didn't even have to turn my head to know the heavy rhythmic tread. It was the sound of authority, the sound of a man who used a badge to justify his own failures. "You look like hell, Eleanor," my father said, bypassing any greeting. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask how the surgery went. He just sat in the vinyl chair, his large frame making the room feel microscopic. "Funny," I rasped, my throat burning. "I feel like hell, too. Maybe it's the missing organ and the morphine." Arthur leaned forward, his eyes the same icy blue as mine boring into me. "Julian called me. He's frantic. He's in deep with some bad lenders from the suburbs. He says you turned your back on him." "I didn't turn my back, Dad. I closed the vault." I snapped, the anger bubbling up hot and metallic. "I've given him over $40,000 in the last 5 years. I paid for his tech startup that was just a gambling site. I paid his back rent in Lincoln Park. I even paid for the lawyer when he got that DUI 3 years ago." "And that's what a sister does." Arthur's voice boomed the same tone he used in interrogation rooms. "He's your blood. He's struggling. You're a doctor, Eleanor. You have the fancy condo, the high salary, the stability. He has nothing. He has nothing because he burns everything he touches." I screamed, the effort sending a white-hot spike of agony through my abdomen. I gasped, clutching my side, my vision swimming. I reached for my phone. My hand was steady now. I wasn't calling my bank. I was calling a woman I'd treated in the ER 6 months ago, a high-stakes divorce and criminal defense attorney who had handed me her card and said, "Doctor, if you ever need someone to be a shark for you, call me." My father didn't flinch. He didn't reach for the call button. He just watched me struggle. "You've always been the cold one, just like your mother. You think because you have a degree you're better than us. But when the world comes for you, who do you think is going to stand by you? Not your hospital boards, not your colleagues, only family. Family doesn't ask me to go bankrupt while I'm in a recovery ward." I hissed, tears of frustration pricking my eyes. "He asked for $8,500. I don't even have that liquid right now because of the down payment on the new equipment for my clinic." "Then take out a loan. Use your credit. You have the score for it," he said dismissively, as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "He needs it by tonight. I told him you'd figure it out." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the gray in his buzz-cut hair, the broken capillaries on his nose from years of cheap whiskey, and the absolute lack of empathy in his gaze. He wasn't a father. He was a collection agent for a loser. "Get out," I said. He blinked, stunned. "What did you say to me?" "I said, get out, Arthur." I repeated the use of his first name, hitting him like a physical blow. "If you love his survival so much, sell your pension. Sell that oversized truck you don't need, but stay away from my bank account and stay out of this room." He stood up, his face darkening to a dangerous shade of plum. You're making a mistake, Elle. A lonely, expensive mistake. When he gets hurt, and he will, that blood will be on your hands. I'll make sure of it. He slammed the door so hard, a framed get well card from my nursing staff fell off the nightstand. I lay there in the vibrating silence, the monitors beeping a steady, mocking rhythm. My father's threat blood on your hands was an old song, but I was tired of the melody. I realized then that they weren't just parasites. They were predators. And a predator doesn't stop because you ask nicely. It only It was time to go hunting. The breaking point. The night was a relentless cycle of throbbing pain and the rhythmic chime of my phone. By 3 a.m., the morphine drip had reached its limit, leaving me raw and exposed to the digital assault Julian was launching from the shadows of the city. My phone sat on the nightstand, its screen a glowing ember in the dark, pulsating with one notification after another. I finally reached for it, my fingers trembling with a mix of exhaustion and dread. There were 34 missed calls. The text messages had mutated from desperate pleas into jagged shards of malice. I hope you're enjoying the luxury suite while I'm looking over my shoulder, Elle. They're at my door. If I lose a finger tonight, I'm coming for yours. Dad says you're a heartless bitch. He's right. For 30 years, messages like these had been my shackles. I was the reliable one, the doctor with the steady hands and the deep pockets. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy the love of a family that only saw me as a line of credit. But as I read those words sent, while I was literally recovering from the removal of an organ, the last tether of guilt snapped. It didn't just break. It evaporated. At 8:00 a.m., the heavy oak door to my room swung open. It wasn't a nurse. Victoria Hayes stepped in her charcoal suit, sharp enough to cut glass. She carried a leather briefcase like a shield and radiated an aura of expensive, calculated aggression. "Dr. Vance," she said, her voice a cool, professional balm. "I've reviewed the screenshots you sent. You've been the bank for a ghost for far too long. In Chicago, we call this extortion. In your family, you call it Tuesday." "I want it to stop, Victoria," I said, struggling to sit upright. The movement sent a white-hot spike of agony through my stitches, but I welcomed it. It kept me focused. "I want the ghost exorcised." "I've already drafted the emergency filings," she began, but she was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway. The door burst open again. This time, it was Julian. He looked like a man who had spent the night in a gutter, greasy hair, bloodshot eyes, and a wrinkled hoodie that smelled of stale cigarettes and panic. He ignored the nursing assistant shouting behind him and charged toward my bed. "Eleanor, you blocked my number, are you kidding me?" he roared, his voice cracking with a frantic, dangerous energy. "I need that 8,500 right now. These guys followed me here, Elle. They're in the damn parking lot. Do you want them to come up here?" Victoria stood up, her small frame becoming a towering wall of legal authority. "Mr. Vance, I am Eleanor's counsel. You are currently trespassing in a surgical recovery ward and committing felony intimidation. If you do not exit this room immediately, I will have security detain you until the CPD arrives." Julian sneered, his face twisting into something unrecognizable. "Counsel, you're paying a shark instead of saving your own blood." "Dad was right. You're a parasite, Eleanor. You think you're better than us because of that white coat. You took everything, the brains, the luck, and left me to rot. You owe me for every sacrifice Dad made for your tuition." "I owe you nothing, Julian." I hissed the words tearing out of my throat like jagged glass. "I don't owe you for your gambling, your failed investments, or your cowardice. I have bled for this family for a decade, and I am officially empty. Get out." For a second, I saw a flicker of genuine hatred in his eyes. He lunged toward my nightstand, his hand closing around the heavy glass water pitcher. Before the guards could reach him, He hurled it with all his might. It shattered against the wall, inches above my head, raining shards of glass and ice water over my blankets. "You're dead to me!" he screamed as two security guards finally tackled him, pinning his face to the linoleum floor. "You hear me? Elle, you're dead!" I looked down at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. "Good!" I shouted back as they hauled him kicking and screaming toward the elevator. "Then dead people don't write checks." The room fell into a terrifyingly quiet state. Victoria didn't skip a beat. She pulled out her phone and hit speed dial. "It's Hayes. File the civil protection order immediately. Add physical assault and destruction of property. And call Detective Miller at the 1st District. I want a squad car at the hospital exit now." She looked at me, a thin veil of respect in her eyes. "That was the breaking point, Eleanor. He just handed us the keys to his prison cell." I stared at the shattered glass on the floor, the ruins of my loyalty. "I'm not just hiding from him anymore, Victoria," I said, wiping a stray tear of rage from my cheek. "I want him to pay for every cent he took. I want the world to see the monster behind the family name." "Then let's go to war," she replied. "Legal war paint." The hospital room, once a place of recovery, had become a command center. By the next morning, the shattered glass had been swept away, but the air still felt sharp. Victoria returned at 9 a.m., dropping a thick manila folder onto my rolling-over bed table. "The emergency protection order was granted at dawn," she said, pulling up a chair. "The judge saw the photo of the shattered picture and Julian's prior record. He's legally barred from coming within 500 feet of you, your home, or this hospital. But that's just the shield, Eleanor. Now we build the sword." I looked at the documents. "What's the plan?" "We aren't just filing for a restraining order. We're filing a civil suit for coercive control and financial exploitation of a vulnerable person." Victoria explained, her eyes gleaming with a predatory intelligence. "I want to document every loan, every wire transfer, and every threatening text from the last 5 years. We're going to calculate the interest on the trauma he's caused you." I spent the afternoon scrolling through years of bank statements on my laptop. It was a sickening journey through my own weakness. June 20, 22, $1,200 for car repairs. Actually, a sportsbook debt. November 2023, $3,500 for rent. Actually a failed crypto scam. The numbers added up to a staggering $42,000. Money I had earned during double shifts, money I'd saved for my own clinic, vanished into the black hole of Julian's greed. Around 4:00 p.m., my phone buzzed. Not Julian. It was a restricted number. I knew that heavy silence before the voice began. "You really did it, didn't you?" My father's voice was a low growl, vibrating with a menace that used to make my blood run cold. "You put the police on your own brother. He's hiding in a motel in Cicero because he's afraid to go home and find a squad car waiting." "He should be afraid, Dad," I said, my voice surprisingly level. "He attacked me in a hospital bed." "Did he tell you that part? Or did he leave out the shattered glass and the death threats?" "He was emotional. He's desperate," Arthur roared. "We handle things in the family, Eleanor. You're dragging our name through the mud in the Daily Center. You know what they call people like you in my old precinct a rat? You're a rat, Elle." "Then call me a rat," I fired back, the anger rising like a tide. Because the family way was slow-motion suicide for me. I'm done being the ghostwriter for Julian's debts. If you want to help him, go ahead. Give him your pension. But if you call me again to advocate for him, I'll have Victoria add your name to the protection order. Don't think for a second I won't." The silence on the other end was electric. I had never spoken to him like that. I had always been the submissive daughter, nodding while he lectured me on loyalty. "You've changed," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more chilling than the shout.
That accident scrambled your brain. You think you're a big-shot doctor who can cut ties? You're a Vance, and a Vance doesn't survive long without the pack. I'm not a part of your pack, Arthur. I'm the one you were hunting,
I said, and hung up. I turned to Victoria, who had been listening to the whole exchange. He's not going to stop. He's going to fuel Julian's fire.
Let him,
Victoria said, scribbling notes. The more they talk, the more rope they give us to hang them with. Your father just admitted to knowing Julian is hiding, which implies he knows Julian committed a crime. I'm adding aiding and abetting to the discovery phase if he keeps this up. She looked at me, her expression softening just a fraction. Most people fold here, Eleanor. The family pressure is like a hydraulic press. Are you sure you can handle the social fallout? Your cousins, your aunts, they're going to hear their version of the story.
Let them talk,
I said, staring at the IV bruise on my arm. I've spent my life caring for people who didn't care if I lived or died as long as the checks cleared.
If the price of my freedom is being the villain in their story, I'll buy the costume and wear it with pride.
Good, she said, standing up.
Because the hearing is in 4 days. We need to be ready. Julian's people are still out there, and now that the bank is closed, they're going to be looking for someone to blame. We need to make sure the law sees them coming before they see you.
As she left, I looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city looked cold gray and unforgiving. I felt a pang of loneliness, a sharp reminder that I was truly cutting the cord. But beneath the loneliness was a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Power. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the blow to land. I was the one choosing the weapon.
Chapter 5.
Shadow in the hallway. Discharge day didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tactical retreat. I was wheeled out of the hospital through a service exit, Victoria's idea to avoid any unpleasant encounters in the main lobby. Chicago was under a blanket of sleet, the gray slush on the streets mirroring the grit in my teeth. My husband, Mark, drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He had been my silent rock, but I could see the toll this war was taking on him.
We changed the locks,
Mark said as we pulled into the driveway of our brownstone.
And I installed the Ring floodlight cameras. Even the side gate has a sensor now.
Thank you, I whispered, clutching my stomach as the car hit a pothole. Every bump was a reminder of my physical fragility, a sharp contrast to the hardened shell I was trying to project. Our home, once my sanctuary, now felt like a fortified bunker. I spent the first 48 hours on the sofa, a laptop perched on my knees, my phone perpetually tethered to a charger. Victoria was relentless. We were digging into Julian's investments, and what we found was a labyrinth of shadows. He hadn't just lost money. He had been laundering small amounts through a shell company using my name as a silent partner without my knowledge.
He used my SSN, Victoria,
I told her over a frantic FaceTime call.
He opened a credit line in my name 2 years ago. The address listed is Dad's old house.
That's identity theft, Eleanor, Victoria replied, her face grim. He didn't just want your money. He wanted your credit, your reputation, and your safety net. He was building a trapdoor under your life. The realization made me nauseous. My own brother hadn't just been a parasite. He had been an architect of my potential ruin. That evening, the first shadow appeared. I was in the kitchen heating up soup when the chime on my phone alerted me to movement at the front door. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I opened the app. It wasn't Julian. It was a man I didn't recognize, tall, wearing a heavy work jacket and a flat cap pulled low. He wasn't knocking. He was just standing there, staring directly into the camera lens with a terrifying blank expression. He held up a piece of paper. On it, written in thick black marker, was a single number, $8,500. I dropped the spoon, the clatter echoing like a gunshot.
Mark!
I screamed. By the time Mark reached the door, the man was gone, disappearing into the swirling snow. But the message had been delivered. Julian's people didn't care about protection orders. They didn't care about family drama. They wanted their pound of flesh, and they knew exactly where the bank lived. 20 minutes later, my father called. I didn't want to answer, but I knew I had to. "Did you get the message, Elle?" he asked, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You sent a thug to my house, Dad, while I'm recovering from surgery. Have you completely lost your mind?" My voice was trembling, a mix of terror and pure, unadulterated rage. "I didn't send anyone," Arthur said calmly. "But I told you these people aren't patient. Julian is in a hole and he's telling them you're the one holding the ladder. They don't see a doctor. They see a woman with a big house and a husband with a good job who's being difficult. Just pay it, Eleanor. Pay it and the shadows go away." "The shadows go away when Julian goes to jail," I yelled. "You're an ex-cop, for God's sake. You're supposed to stand for the law, not facilitate a shakedown of your own daughter." "The law doesn't keep you warm at night, Elle," he snapped. "And it won't stop a brick through your window. This is the last time I'll try to talk sense into you. After this, you're on your own. Don't call me when the glass starts breaking." He hung up. I stood in the middle of my darkened kitchen, the blue light of the security monitor reflecting in my eyes. I realized then that my father wasn't just a bystander. He was the enabler, the silent partner in Julian's crimes. He was using my fear to protect his favorite son. "He's not going to stop," I whispered to the empty room. "Then neither will we," Mark said, coming up behind me and placing his hands on my shoulders. "We call Victoria. We call the police. And we get a private guard if we have to. But we don't give them a cent." I looked at the screen at the empty porch where the shadow had stood. The fear was still there, a cold weight in my chest, but beneath it, the fury was crystallizing into something unbreakable. Julian and Arthur thought they could scare me into submission. They thought my physical weakness made me an easy target. They forgot that as a doctor, I knew exactly where the nerves were, and I was about to start cutting. "Call Victoria," I said, my voice hard as flint. "Tell her we're adding extortion and criminal conspiracy to the filing. And tell her I want the hearing moved up. I'm tired of waiting for them to move. It's my turn to strike." Chapter 6. The Glass Courtroom. The Richard J. Daley Center stood like a rusted iron giant against the backdrop of a freezing Chicago morning. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet wool and the low hum of collective anxiety. This was the arena where lives were dismantled and reconstructed through the cold precision of the law. I walked through the metal detectors with a cane in my right hand and Victoria Hayes at my left. Every step sent a dull thud of pain through my abdomen, but I refused to wince. I had traded my hospital gown for a tailored navy suit, my war paint. "Stay focused," Victoria whispered as we approached courtroom 2402. "Julian's lawyer is a bottom feeder named Saul Vance. He'll try to play the family squabble card. He'll try to make you look like the cold, rich sister. Don't give him an inch." We entered the room and my heart skipped a beat. Julian sat at the respondent's table looking surprisingly clean-cut in a cheap, ill-fitting suit. He was bouncing his leg, a nervous tick I'd seen 1,000 times at Sunday dinners. Behind him sat my father. Arthur Vance was dressed in his old police union jacket. His arms crossed his icy blue eyes, fixed on me, with a gaze that felt like a physical weight. The judge, Honorable Margaret Thorne, took the bench with the efficiency of a surgeon. She didn't look like someone who tolerated theatrics. "Case 4421, Vance versus Vance," the bailiff announced. Victoria stood first, her voice a cool, professional blade. "Your Honor, we are here to request a permanent civil protection order
and to present evidence of a sustained pattern of coercive control, financial exploitation, and criminal intimidation.
For the next 20 minutes, Victoria laid it all out. She projected the screenshots of Julian's threats onto a large screen.
"If I lose a finger, I'm coming for yours."
The words looked gargantuan and grotesque in the formal setting of the court. She played the recording I'd made of my father's advice about the shadows in the parking lot. Then it was my turn. I stood at the witness stand, the wood cold beneath my palms.
"Dr. Vance,"
Victoria asked,
"why seek legal intervention now after years of providing financial support to your brother?"
I looked directly at Julian. For a second, I saw the boy who used to share his candy with me. Then I saw the man who had hurled a pitcher at my head. Because I realized that my love had become a weapon he was using against me, I said, my voice echoing. I thought I was saving him, but I was just funding his destruction. On the night my life was hanging by a thread, he didn't see a sister in pain. He saw a vault that was temporarily closed. Julian's lawyer jumped up.
"Objection, speculation, and inflammatory language."
"Overruled." Judge Thorne said, her eyes never leaving me.
"Continue."
"I am a doctor." I continued, my voice gaining a terrifying strength. "I am trained to identify infections and remove them before they kill the patient. My brother and the enabling system my father built around him is an infection. I am here today to perform the surgery." The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the heating vents. During cross-examination, Saul Vance sneered. "Isn't it true you enjoyed being the savior of the family? Isn't this just post-operative irritability taken to an extreme?" A family spat. "Is a shattered glass pitcher in a recovery ward a spat?" I countered. "Is sending a debt collector to my front door to threaten my life a spat?" Saul shifted to my father. "You're accusing a decorated veteran of the CPD of conspiracy because he tried to mediate. Isn't that ungrateful, Eleanor?" I looked at my father. He tilted his head slightly, waiting for me to break. "My father didn't mediate," I said clearly. "He weaponized my guilt to protect his own ego. He chose Julian's comfort over my safety. If that makes me ungrateful, then I am the most ungrateful daughter in Chicago." Judge Thorne leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning Julian. "Mr. Vance, do you have anything to say?" Julian stood, his voice shaky. I love my sister. I was just scared. I owe people your honor. I was trying to save myself."
"By drowning her?"
The judge asked, her voice like a gavel. She sat back, her hands folded. "I have heard enough. This court is not a playground for family dysfunction. What I see is a systematic erosion of a human being's security. I will have my ruling in 10 minutes. As recess was called, my father walked toward the exit. As he passed our table, he leaned in. "You think you won, Elle," he whispered, his breath smelling of bitter coffee. "The law is a temporary wall. Family is forever." "Not this family," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "This family is closed for business." Chapter 7. Not just family talk. The 10 minutes of recess felt like 10 years. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my back straight, refusing to look at the gallery where my father sat like a looming thundercloud. Victoria tapped her pen rhythmically against her tablet, the only sign that she was even remotely human and not a legal machine. When Judge Thorne returned to the bench, the air in the courtroom seemed to vanish. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the thick stack of bank statements and the transcript of the hospital incident. "I have spent my career listening to people use the word family to justify the unjustifiable." The judge began, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "Mr. Julian Vance, you claim your actions were born of desperation. But desperation does not grant you a license to terrorize. You saw your sister's vulnerability as an opportunity, not a tragedy. She turned her gaze toward me, her expression softening for the briefest of moments. And Dr. Vance, you have been a victim of a very specific kind of violence, one that doesn't always leave bruises but leaves a life in ruins nonetheless. Judge Thorne picked up her gavel and my heart hammered against my ribs. I am granting the permanent protection order for a duration of 10 years, she announced. A sharp gasp came from Julian's table. Furthermore, based on the documented evidence of coerced financial transfers and identity theft, I am issuing a restitution judgment in the amount of $25,000. This will be paid through wage garnishment and the seizure of any liquid assets currently held by the respondent. Julian slumped forward, his head in his hands. I don't have 25,000, he choked out. I don't have 25 cents. Then you will work until you do, Thorne snapped. And I am not finished. Mr. Julian Vance, I am referring the matter of the identity theft and the hospital assault to the state's attorney for criminal prosecution. You are to be remanded into custody immediately pending a bail hearing for the felony charges. The sound of the gavel hitting the bench crack was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. 2 bailiffs stepped forward. The metallic clink of handcuffs being snapped onto Julian's wrists sounded like a symphony. For the first time, he wasn't the one making the threats. He was the one being led away. Elle! You can't do this! Julian screamed as they hauled him toward the side door. Tell them it was a mistake, Dad, do something! Arthur Vance stood up, his face a mask of purple rage. He didn't look at his son. He marched toward me, his heavy boots thudding on the carpet. Mark stepped in front of me, but I put a hand on his arm, moving him aside. I wanted to see this. You've destroyed him, Arthur hissed, leaning over the wooden railing. You've put your own blood in a cage for some money and a piece of paper. You happy now, Eleanor? You happy being the woman who ruined her own family? I didn't ruin this family, Arthur, I said, my voice cold and unwavering. I just stopped being the glue that held your lies together. Julian put himself in that cage. You built the walls by telling him he could do whatever he wanted, as long as he called it family business. You're dead to the Vances, he spat. Don't you ever show your face at my house again. Don't you dare come to my funeral. Don't worry, I replied. I've already scheduled my own life. There's no room in it for your funeral or your guilt. And Arthur, if I see a shadow on my porch again, I won't call you. I'll call the sheriff to serve you with the same papers Julian just got. My father's lip curled in a silent snarl before he turned and stormed out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging violently behind him. The room cleared out until it was just Mark Victoria and me. The silence was staggering. I sank back into my chair, my strength finally failing me. My abdomen ached and my head was spinning, but for the first time in my life, the air felt clean. You did it, Victoria said, closing her briefcase with a satisfying snap. You broke the cycle. It doesn't feel like a victory, I whispered, looking at the empty spot where Julian had been standing. It feels like an amputation. Sometimes, Mark said, taking my hand. You have to lose the limb to save the body. I looked at the judge's bench, now empty. The law had spoken. It had named the monster. It had validated my pain. But as we walked out of the Daily Center into the biting Chicago wind, I knew the war wasn't entirely over. Julian was in a cell, and my father was in a rage. The mask of the Vance family had been shattered, and now I had to learn how to live among the shards. The violation. The first 48 hours of peace were a dangerous illusion. Julian was in Cook County Jail, and Arthur had gone silent. I spent my days in the brownstone, the interior quiet, and filled with the soft, deceptive light of a Chicago winter. I thought the $25,000 judgment and the handcuffs were enough to hold the monsters at bay. I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday. Mark was at a university meeting, leaving me alone with a medical journal and the lingering ache of my surgical scars. The chime of the Ring camera startled me. I opened the app expecting a delivery. Instead, I saw a grainy, wide-angle view of Arthur Vance. He wasn't yelling. He was staring directly into the lens with a chilling, dead-eyed expression. In his hand, he held a manila envelope.
Eleanor,
His voice crackled through the phone's speaker.
I know you're watching. You think you're smart hiding behind your lawyers, but you forgot one thing.
I taught you how to be tough, but I taught Julian how to survive. He's out. A friend from the precinct posted his bond an hour ago. My blood turned to ice.
He's legally barred from this zip code, Arthur, I shouted at the screen. A piece of paper doesn't change locks, Elle, Arthur whispered. He's coming for his things, and he's coming for what you owe him for the bail. Now it's not just family business. It's personal.
He dropped the envelope on the mat and walked away into the swirling snow. I scrambled to the window, locking a latch that was already secure, my hands shaking as I dialed Victoria.
He's out,
I gasped.
Julian is out and they're coming here. Call 911 immediately, Victoria commanded. Do not open that door for anyone but a uniformed officer.
As I waited, the house felt like it was shrinking. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a threat. Then a loud thud echoed from the back of the house, the basement window. I had forgotten the sensor was glitching. I grabbed my heavy cane not for support, but as a weapon, and retreated into the hallway.
Eleanor.
The voice was muffled but unmistakable. Julian was in the kitchen. He sounded frantic, fueled by something more jagged than just greed.
I know you're in here, sis. You think you can put me in a cage? You think you can take my money?
The sound of shattering glass followed. He had smashed the kitchen door. I didn't wait. I retreated into the master bedroom, slammed the heavy oak door, and threw the deadbolt.
Julian, the police are minutes away,
I screamed, my back against the wood.
I'm already ruined, Elle,
he roared from the other side, his fists pounding the door so hard the frames groaned.
You did that? You're going to give me the money for the flight to Vegas, or I'm taking it out of your skin.
The pounding was rhythmic and terrifying. I could hear the wood splintering. Julian didn't want the $8,500 anymore. He wanted to see the successful doctor broken. Suddenly, blue and red lights flashed against the bedroom curtains. The wail of a siren cut through the night.
CPD, open up,
a voice boomed. The pounding stopped instantly. I heard Julian scuffling toward the back stairs. I didn't move until I heard the sound of a struggle, a shouted command to get on the ground, and the beautiful metallic clink of handcuffs for the second time in a week. When the officers finally knocked on my door, I was curled on the floor, weeping from sheer, exhausting terror. They led Julian out in his socks, his face bruised. Arthur was standing by his truck down the street, watching his son be shoved into a squad car. An officer handed me the envelope Arthur had left. Inside were photos from our childhood, us, at the lake. Us at Christmas, all torn into jagged, unrecognizable pieces.
He violated a high court order, ma'am,
the officer said.
This time, there's no bond, and we're filing charges against your father for witness intimidation.
I looked at the torn photos. He's not my brother, I whispered. He's just a man who shares my DNA, and I am finally done paying for his life. Ashes of loyalty. The days following Julian's second arrest were draped in a heavy funereal silence. The shattered glass in the kitchen had been replaced, and the bedroom door was now reinforced steel, but the feeling of being hunted remained. My body was healing the physical pain, receding into a dull thud, but my mind was a minefield of what ifs. Julian was now held in a high-security wing of Cook County Jail. No bond, no friends from the precinct could pull strings this time. He was facing felony home invasion violation of a protection order and identity theft. The family business had officially become a state-level criminal case. I was sitting in my living room staring at a letter that had arrived via courier. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from my father. "You've won, Eleanor," it read in his cramped, aggressive handwriting. "Julian is looking at 5 to 7 years because of your testimony. I hope your fancy career is worth the sight of your brother in a jumpsuit." "I'm moving to Florida. Don't look for me. As far as I'm concerned, I only ever had one child, and he's currently in a cage you built." I didn't cry. I felt a strange, hollow sense of relief. The umbilical cord of guilt had finally been severed not by my hand, but by his. "He's still trying to make it your fault," Mark said, walking in with 2 mugs of coffee. He sat beside me looking at the letter. "Even at the finish line, he chooses the lie." "It's the only language he knows," I said, leaning my head on Mark's shoulder. Loyalty is a one-way street for Arthur Vance. You give until you're empty, and then he blames you for being hollow. The phone rang. It was Victoria. "Eleanor, Julian is terrified," she said, her voice sounding triumphant. "Now that he's realized Dad can't bail him out, he's ready to talk. He's offered a plea deal, 5 years in Stateville. But here's the kicker: to avoid conspiracy charges for hiding Julian's stolen assets, Arthur just signed an affidavit against his own son. The pack just ate its own Eleanor." I sat in stunned silence. The man who had spent decades preaching about blood, the man who had called me a rat, had sold out his favorite son the moment his own pension was on the line. The hypocrisy was so absolute it was almost darkly comedic. "So it's over?" I asked. "Legally, yes. Julian goes to prison and Arthur disappears into the sunset of his own cowardice." That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove. I drove past my childhood home on the south side. A for sale sign was staked into the frozen dirt. I looked at the window of the room Julian and I used to share as kids, back when he used to build forts out of blankets and tell me he'd always protect me from the monsters. I realized then that Julian hadn't protected me from the monsters. He had invited them in, and my father had fed them. I got out of the car and stood in the biting wind. I wasn't the villain. I was the survivor. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the torn pieces of the childhood photos Arthur had left on my porch. I walked to the trash bin at the corner of the street and dropped them in. I wasn't throwing away the memories. I was throwing away the power those memories had to hurt me. As I drove back to my brownstone, I felt the last of the embers of my anger go out. There was no joy in this, only the quiet, steady beat of a heart that finally belonged to no one but me. The ashes of loyalty were cold. The unbreakable line, revised. The Chicago wind was unusually still as I stood by my study window 6 months after the gavel had finally fallen. 6 months since the word family had transitioned from a constant threat into a deliberate choice. My physical recovery was complete. The silvery scar on my abdomen remained a permanent map of the night I stood my ground. But the internal healing was far more profound. My phone chimed with a soft melodic notification, a replacement for the jarring buzz that used to trigger my panic. It was an update from the Illinois Department of Corrections. Julian Vance. Status: incarcerated. I closed the app without a flinch. Julian was no longer a shadow in my life. He was a number in a database finally facing the reality he had spent 30 years outrunning. The $25,000 restitution was being slowly clawed back from his prison wages, not for the money, but for the principle of the record. "Elle, you ready?" Mark called from downstairs. I grabbed my coat. but my eyes lingered on a small box that had arrived from Florida. No return name, but the aggressive, blocky handwriting was unmistakable. Inside lay Arthur's old, tarnished silver police whistle. No note, no apology, just a pathetic attempt to whistle me back into the pack. I didn't throw it away. I took a pair of heavy shears, snipped the chain, and dropped the silent metal into a bowl of junk. He no longer had a sound. He no longer had power. At the community center in Lincoln Park, I sat in a circle with a dozen women. I wasn't Dr. Vance today. I was just Eleanor. I told them about the $8,500 demand, the shattered glass, and the moment I realized that Arthur's loyalty was a form of incarceration. We are told family is a shield, I told a young woman whose eyes mirrored the terror I once felt. But for many, family is where the worst wounds are inflicted because they know exactly where to cut. The hardest thing you will ever do is draw a line and say no more. People will call you cruel. They will say you are ruining the family. But you cannot ruin what is already broken. You can only stop pretending to be the glue. A woman asked how to stop the guilt. I looked her dead in the eye. You aren't killing them by saying no. You are allowing them to be adults. When we save people from their own consequences, we aren't loving them. We are crippling them. You share a last name, not a destiny. The meeting ended, and as I walked out, the sun finally broke through the Chicago clouds. That evening, Mark and I sat on our porch with glasses of wine. The security cameras hummed quietly, a silent sentry for a peace I had earned.
What are you thinking? Mark asked, pulling a blanket over us. I'm thinking that loyalty is a gift you give to those who earn it, not a debt you owe to those who share your DNA. N.A.,
I said. Julian was in a cell, and Arthur was nursing his bitterness in exile. They were gone from my narrative. I was no longer the fixer or the bank. I reached into my pocket and touched a small, smooth stone I'd kept from the courthouse. It was unbreakable, just like me. I had broken the pattern. If we ever had a daughter, she would know that her safety was non-negotiable because she had a mother who fought to prove it. The blood price was paid in full. The account was closed. For the first time in 30 years, the balance was exactly where it needed to be. I was finally irrevocably free. Family is everything, but it's not a blank check for people to drain your life just because you share the same blood. Don't confuse being a good person with being a doormat. Real love is about lifting each other up, not constantly cleaning up someone else's mess while they pull you under. It's okay to set boundaries and say no when things turn toxic. You aren't being selfish for choosing your own sanity and survival. You're just finally taking charge of your own life. Thanks for sticking around until the very end of Eleanor's journey. I hope her story gave you some food for thought, or maybe even a bit of strength for your own path. If this story hit home for you, please drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to hit that follow button so you don't miss out on the next stories coming your way. See you in the next one.